The stars are right, and that means it's time for another episode of The Whisper in Darkness. I'm your host, the manfromleng. Thank you very much for joining me today. On this episode, we are reviewing version 1.9 of the FAQ for the Arkham Horror LCG. During my recent In the Know video on multi-class cards, I hinted that a new FAQ was imminent, and Fantasy Flight Games dropped the latest version of the rules document on Monday. Designer MJ Newman and Jeremy Zorn issued errata for 10 cards, clarified a handful of rules, answered a few frequently asked questions, and tweaked the optional list of taboos to address at least 5 problematic cards, most of which could be abused with recursion effects. Remember that if you enjoy this type of content, remember to like, comment, and subscribe. Before I dissect the latest FAQ, I'd like to thank the patrons of this channel for their tremendous support. The Arkham Horror LCG community is amazing, and these people have gone above and beyond to bring you this type of content. If you'd like to support the channel's goals and see your name on this list, head over to patreon.com, sign up for a tier of your choice, and claim your rewards. That would be awesome. Without further ado, let's dive into version 1.9 of the FAQ for the Arkham Horror LCG. After several months with little in the way of news about the Arkham Horror LCG, Fantasy Flight has been on an absolute tear in June, announcing not one but 2 Edge of the Earth expansions, a Roland Banks Parallel Investigator, a revised core set, and now version 1.9 of the FAQ, which dropped on Monday. This is the first update to the FAQ since October 2020, and the changes fall into 4 categories: card errata, rulings and clarifications, frequently asked questions, and the optional list of taboos. The document also made 2 small changes to the quick reference section, adding the icons for cards released in the novellas and parallel investigators to the list of promo icons. One of the biggest changes to the FAQ isn't contained within the document itself. In the introduction to the article about the FAQ posted on FFG's website, designers MJ Newman and Jeremy Zorn announced plans to update the FAQ twice annually, before and after each campaign release, so that players know what to expect. They argue this release schedule will give players a nice launching point for a new campaign as they build investigator decks, and give cards their chance to shine for a short while before they even consider an errata or taboo. That said, they reserve the right to make emergency FAQ updates if something particularly problematic crops up. First, it's worth noting here that the article suggests there will be only 1 campaign released annually. I don't think that's a significant change from what we have received in the past, but it does beg the question, how much time is going to pass between major releases under the new release model? For all its problems, the LCG distribution model did provide a steady drip of new content to keep players invested in the game month after month. Unfortunately, I don't think we'll know the answer to that question until later this year at the earliest. FFG just announced the change to the Arkham Horror LCG's release model, so the game is entering uncharted waters. Of course, releasing only 1 quote-unquote big box campaign annually doesn't preclude FFG from releasing other products in the interval, such as more investigator starter decks or a shorter campaign similar in length to that of the Guardians of the Abyss standalone product. We'll just have to wait and see what FFG has in store for us, but I suspect that the Arkham Horror LCG community won't have a chance to get bored. Second, I'm quite happy that the designers are moving towards a more systematic release schedule for the FAQ, and hopefully leaving the scattershot approach to the FAQ firmly in the past. Between the release of the revised core set and the new release model for the Edge of the Earth expansions, the Arkham Horror LCG is poised to undergo something of a renaissance that is going to attract a lot of new players to the game. Fantasy Flight Games and Asmodee have come under fire of late for failing to communicate effectively with the Arkham Horror LCG community, so making a commitment to keep players up to date on the rules of the game is a small step in the right direction. Let's see if FFG can stick to the plan, so to speak. With that out of the way, let's dig into the meat of the FAQ, starting with card errata. The designers note in the article that they try to avoid issuing errata since they prefer cards to do what they say, rather than requiring players to look up what the cards really do. However, sometimes an erratum is unavoidable if the card's functionality is unclear, or it has unintended consequences that may warp the game environment. The errata issued on Monday for 10 cards covers a bit of both. The first card on the list is Wendy Adams' signature card from the core set, Wendy's Amulet. The original wording of the forced effect on Wendy's Amulet failed to account for events such as Premonition from the Heart of the Elders Mythos pack, which remains in play until the forced effect triggers. This enabled players to exploit an infinite loop, which is obviously not what the designers intended when they designed Wendy's Amulet. The ERRATUM changes the forced effect on Wendy's amulet to forced after you play an event or discard an event from play. Place it on the bottom of your deck instead of in your discard pile, effectively closing the loop. Infinite loops are the bane of card game designers, so this change is really a no-brainer. Next up is Bait and Switch 3 from the In the Clutches of Chaos Mythos pack. This one is pretty straightforward. The level 0 version of Bait and Switch, which was released in the Dunwich Legacy Deluxe expansion, has the Trick trait, while Bait and Switch 3 has the Tactic trait. The ERRATUM simply replaces the Tactic trait with the Trick trait, bringing the level 3 version back into line with its level 0 counterpart. I think the only investigator affected by the change is the parallel version of Roland Banks, whose deck building options include Tactic cards level 0 to 3. I doubt many people were going to play Bait and Switch 3 in parallel Roland anyway, so not a great loss here. The next two cards to receive errata are from the Dream Eaters Deluxe expansion. The Hungering Blade, a Guardian asset, and the Crystallizer of Dreams, a Rogue asset, have the clause as an additional cost to put this card into play, which was slightly different from similar cards, such as the Summoned Hound, a Mystic asset from Where the Gods Dwell. The clause on the Summoned Hound is as an additional cost to play Summoned Hound. The big issue here is that the terms play and put into play mean quite different things in the Arkham Horror LCG rules reference. To play a card, an investigator must pay the card's resource cost and meet any applicable play restrictions and conditions. Most cards can only be played by taking a play action. The notable exception here are cards with the fast keyword, which are not played during a play action. They are played anytime the specified triggering condition is met or during an appropriate player window. On the other hand, some card abilities cause a card to be put into play from an out-of-play state. A good example of a card with this ability is Miss Doyle, Cat General of Ulthar from the Dream Eaters Deluxe expansion. The key difference between play and put into play is that the resource cost of a card being put into play is not paid. Cards that enter play in this manner must do so in a play area that satisfies the standard game rules associated with playing or drawing cards, and that a card that has been put into play is not considered to have been played or drawn. The errata to the Hungering Blade and Crystallizer of Dreams clears up any confusion by changing their game text to reflect the fact that they are played and not put into play. Dexter Drake's replacement signature weakness, Yaztaroth, which was released in the Blood of Balshandor novella, is another card that got caught up in the confusion surrounding the use of the word play versus put into play. Rules as written, Yaztaroth prohibits you from putting assets into play, but technically you can still play them, which is a little odd. The ERRATUM changes the wording on Yaztaroth to make it clear that you cannot play assets or put assets into play while this weakness is in Dexter Drake's threat area. The next card to receive ERRATUM is our first encounter card on the list, Act 3A, The Black Expanse, from the Point of No Return Mythos pack. Both versions of Act 1A, Entering the Underworld, and Act 2A, The Descent, have a forced effect that states, after an enemy with one or more clues on it is defeated, take control of each of those clues. However, the forced effect on Act 3A, The Black Expanse, states, after an enemy with one or more clues on it is defeated, place those clues on this act. I'm not sure how this error cropped up. Perhaps placing clues on the act was a prior iteration of the scenario. While placing the clues on the act may seem like a minor issue, it does have negative impact on cards such as Dr. William T. Mallison, Forewarned, and Quick Study, which require investigators to place clues on locations as part of the cost to trigger effects. Placing clues on the act could also affect Roland Banks, who could find himself without a clue to discover to clear his signature weakness, Cover Up. The ERRATUM simply brings the forced effect on 3A back in line with the forced effects on 1A and 2A. It's worth noting the ERRATUM for the Black Expanse indicates the card belongs to the Innsmouth Conspiracy cycle rather than the Dream Eater cycle, so it appears an ERRATUM for the ERRATUM is in order. Seeking Answers 2, a Seeker event from the Harvey Walters starter deck, has been at the subject of a vigorous and lengthy debate over on ArkhamDB since its release. The debate centers on the question of how many clues you discover when you play this card. Is it 2 or is it 3? This issue even tripped me up when I reviewed the card during my Harvey Walters deck tech. I assumed that when you played Seeking Answers 2, you discovered a total of 2 clues, which made sense given the power level of its level 0 counterpart. However, that's not what the card actually says. Rules as written, you should discover 3 clues when you play Seeking Answers 2, since the card is missing the "instead of discovering a clue at your location" clause that is on the level 0 counterpart. Version 1.9 of the FAQ finally puts the debate to rest, adding the "instead of discovering a clue at your location" clause to Seeking Answers 2, so you only discover 2 total clues from among your location and the connecting locations when you play it. That brings us to Norman Withers, the Seeker Investigator, who will be released in the upcoming Edge of the Earth Investigator expansion. I discussed the Erratum to Norman, who was originally released as a promo in the Ire of the Void novella, during my recent video about multi-class cards, so this Erratum comes as no surprise. Briefly, Norman was the odd man out when it came to the multi-class cards released in the Secret Name Mythos pack, since he had unlimited access to one class, in this case level 0 Seeker cards, and limited access to the second class level 0 Mystic cards. However, unlike other investigators, Norman's deck building options didn't include the word "other", so a multi-class card would count against one of his limited slots, even if it also fell into the unlimited category. The most notorious example of this problem is Scroll of Secrets, a level 0 Seeker and Mystic asset from the Secret Name. Norman could include Scroll of Secrets in his deck, since it was both a level 0 Seeker and level 0 Mystic card. However, since Norman's deck building options didn't include the word "other", Scroll of Secrets counted as one of his 5 level 0 Mystic cards, which was not ideal. Norman's odd deck building options weren't that big a deal, since there were only 5 multi-class cards in the entire Circle Undone cycle. However, the Edge of the Earth Investigator expansion releasing later this year promises to have many multi-class cards, which could pose a problem for Norman. With the Erratum becoming official, Norman's deck building options now read up to other 5 Mystic cards, which fixes the issue, although it doesn't make that much sense grammatically. It would appear Norman's Erratum will also need an Erratum in a future FAQ. The final player card to receive an Erratum in version 1.9 of the FAQ is Guided by the Unseen, a Seeker asset released in the A Light in the Fog Mythos pack during the Innsmouth Conspiracy cycle. This card was busted the moment it was released, since there is no limit on how often you may trigger it, which enables players to use its ability an infinite number of times to trigger their cards with the Research trait, such as Astounding Revelation from the Dream Eaters Deluxe expansion. Nate Lost in Time and Space and I discussed various fixes for the card during our review of the Seeker cards from A Light in the Fog, and the designers opted to limit the search to once per test, breaking the loop. Guided by the Unseen still provides dedicated Seekers with an easy way to search their decks to trigger research effects. They'll just have to do it over several tests, not all at once. The final encounter card to receive an Erratum is Act 1A, Back into the Depths from the Into the Maelstrom Mythos pack. The original version of the Act forced investigators to advance once they achieved the objective. The Erratum now gives investigators the option to advance. I'm not entirely certain as to the reason for the change, since I haven't played this scenario yet, but I have heard that forcing the investigators to advance before they were ready to tackle the next part of the scenario had the potential to be quite bad, so I'm sure the change is for the best. Version 1.9 of the FAQ contains 4 additions to the Rulings and Clarification section. Most of the changes are relatively minor, but I'll run through them quickly for the sake of completeness. The first change is in Section 1.16 Multi-Class Cards. I've already discussed the Erratum to Norman Withers, which brings his deck-building options back into line with the investigators like Marie Lambeau, Finn Edwards, and Carolyn Fern. The change in Section 1.16 simply confirms what many players already suspected. That is, the deck-building options for the investigators in the upcoming Edge of the Earth expansion will likely be similar to that of Norman's. That's good news for fans of investigators like Lily Chen, given the number of multi-class cards expected in that expansion. Section 1.21 clarifies what happens if an enemy or investigator would find themselves at no location. Basically, enemies and investigators must always be at a location during gameplay. If an effect such as a cannot move effect would cause an enemy or investigator to not be at a location, then you ignore that effect. For example, if you're playing the Pallid Mask scenario from the Path to Carcosa cycle, and you advance to Act 3A, The Way Out, the forced effect causes the location farthest from the Gate to Hell to be discarded. The forced effect instructs you to move each investigator and enemy that was at that location to a connecting location. Theoretically, if an enemy or investigator at that location cannot move, it would become trapped at no location. The clarification resolves this ambiguity, and you would temporarily ignore the cannot move effect. Fortunately, discarding locations is fairly rare, so you shouldn't run into this situation too often. Section 1.22 clarifies what happens if a card with the hidden keyword, such as the Whispers in Your Head treacheries from the Path to Carcosa cycle, are in your hand when you are eliminated from a scenario. The simple answer is that they go to the discard pile in the same way as encounter cards in their threat area, such as Frozen in Fear. Section 2.12 clarifies what the word "you" means when taking or being dealt damage. "You" in this case includes any assets you control. If an enemy attacks you and you assign the damage to an ally, you can still counterattack using Survival Knife, a Guardian asset from the Forgotten Age Deluxe expansion. This clarification also applies to cards such as I've Had Worse, Delay the Inevitable, Devil's Luck, and Flesh Ward, so you can use those cards to cancel damage dealt to a key asset if necessary. There are only 2 new entries in the Frequently Asked Questions section. The first clarifies what happens when Zoe Samaras engages a swarming enemy. The short answer is that she may trigger her response to gain 1 resource for the enemy and each of its swarm cards, not just once for the swarming enemy. Needless to say, Zoe has the potential to generate a lot of resources during the Beyond the Gates of Sleep and the Waking Nightmare scenarios from the Dream Eaters Deluxe expansion. The second question clarifies whether a player can look at face-down cards beneath or attached to other cards they control, such as Ancestral Knowledge, Backpack, or Diana Stanley. The short answer is yes. If you can draw, play, or interact with one of those cards, you may look at them to know which one you wish to draw or play. Of course, you can't look at face-down cards attached to encounter cards or placed face-down by scenario effects. A quick side note, the FAQ states Ancestral Knowledge is card number 2 in the Innsmouth Conspiracy cycle, when it is actually card number 303. That makes at least 3 errata to the errata that I have found so far. Finally, let's tackle the changes to the List of Taboos. For those of you who are new to the Arkham Horror LCG, the List of Taboos is a list of cards with optional deck building restrictions or text changes. The key word here is optional. You are free to ignore the List of Taboos if you wish. The List of Taboos is actually comprised of 3 lists of cards: Chained, Unchained, Mutated, and Forbidden. Cards on the Chained, Unchained list have their experience point cost increased or decreased by the amount listed. It's important to remember that the card's level remains the same for deck building purposes, only the experience spent to buy the card is changed. For example, Machete is a level 0 Guardian card that costs 1 additional experience point to add to your deck. Cards on the Mutated list have additional or altered text, while Forbidden cards are, well, banned. Currently there is only 1 banned card, Double or Nothing, from the Dunwich Legacy Deluxe expansion. Designers MJ Newman and Jeremy Zorin took a slightly different approach to the List of Taboos in this iteration of the FAQ, focusing almost exclusively on the Mutated list to prevent certain cards from dominating players' decks, while giving players who do follow the List of Taboos some new options to consider. Let's deal with the Chained Unchained list first. 3 cards were removed from the Chained Unchained list: Elusive, the Springfield M1903, and Segment of Onyx. Elusive may have been removed from the Chained Unchained list, however it was added to the Mutated list with altered text, which now reads: disengage from each enemy engaged with you and move to a connecting location with no enemies. I'm not surprised that Elusive was removed from the Chained Unchained list, since it is a card from the core set, and a revised core set will be released in October. Rogue players no longer need to pay additional experience to include Elusive in their deck, which is good, but they can't use it to teleport clear across the map either, which is a significant nerf. Honestly, I'm not entirely sure what to make of this change. Elusive is one of my favorite cards from the core set, and it has the potential to be exceptionally powerful in scenarios like Curtain Call and the Doom of Etzli. However, I've rarely played Elusive since it was added to the Chained Unchained list, and I'm not certain whether the Mutated version will make the cut in my rogue decks. Perhaps I've simply moved on from Elusive as the card pool has grown. The Springfield M1903 was also added to the Mutated list with altered text. It gains the following ability: this attack may target a non-elite enemy up to 1 location away from its standard range, ignoring the aloof and retaliate keywords. Someone on the design team clearly has a soft spot for the Springfield, because they keep trying to turn this misfire from the Undimensioned and Unseen Mythos pack into the sniper weapon of players' dreams. First, they added the Springfield to the Chained Unchained list, becoming the first card in the game to have its experience point cost reduced by 1, but that didn't inspire many players to pull the trigger on this expensive, unwieldy weapon. Now they've removed it from the Chained Unchained list and added it to the Mutated list with the ability to snipe non-elite enemies at connecting locations. Will that be enough to persuade players to give the Springfield a second, or in this case, third chance? Perhaps, but it probably won't be me. Honestly, I've pretty much written off the Springfield at this point because it is such an awful weapon in the solo format. I'm not even sure it's viable in multiplayer, given that it only has 3 shots, requires 2 hand slots, and cannot be used to attack enemies engaged with you. I can imagine an investigator barricading themselves in a central location, playing the Springfield and marksmanship to snipe non-elite enemies up to 2 connecting locations away, but I can't think of many scenarios where that's really a viable strategy. In my experience, it's usually the Guardian's job to keep enemies off the soft, squishy members of the group, and the Springfield's restrictions don't really support that plan of attack. Of course, we can't talk about the Springfield without also talking about its spiritual successor, Telescopic Sight. What's worse than the Springfield M1903? A card that lets you turn any firearm into a Springfield M1903, that's what. And for 3 experience points, no less. What an awful card. Well, the designers have dusted off this gem from Union and Disillusion, altering its text to remove attached asset cannot be used to attack enemies engaged with you. I don't know about you, but I'm still not paying 3 experience points for this. It's still restricted to weapons that take 2 hand slots, it still exhausts when you trigger its response, and it's still restricted to non-elite enemies. Frankly, I don't think it's worth the effort or the experience points. Besides Elusive and the Springfield M1903, Segment of Onyx was removed from the Chained Unchained list. However, its bonded card, Pendant of the Queen, was added to the Mutated list with altered text to remove it from the game when it runs out of charges. I like this change. It does give Seekers and off-class Seekers a cool card with 3 powerful abilities, while eliminating the problematic recursion effect. If you want to keep the Pendant around a little longer, you can still add additional charges to it. Pendant of the Queen is not the only card added to the Mutated list that now removes itself from the game. Eucatastrophe, 3 Aces, a Watchful Piece, and Hollow were also very problematic due to their interaction with recursion effects, so the designers altered their text to remove them from the game after they were played. I don't really have that much to add here. Cards like a Watchful Piece have very powerful effects that quickly spiral out of control when combined with recursion effects from the Survivor card pool, so these types of changes are needed to keep them balanced. That's going to do it for my look at version 1.9 of the FAQ for the Arkham Horror LCG. The errata and rules clarifications address a lot of issues that players have had, and the latest additions to the list of taboos tap down most of the abusive strategies that have cropped up over the past 2 cycles. The designer's dedication to the Springfield M1903 and Telescopic Sight is admirable, but I'm not convinced the tweaks will make the cards any more playable. Time will tell if the FAQ receives more regular updates. That's going to do it for this episode. If you enjoyed what you hear, remember to like, comment, and subscribe. If you need to contact me, I can be reached at manfromleng@gmail.com. I'm also on Twitter at manfromleng. Until the stars are right, keep your shotgun close and your elder sign closer. Take care out there, and happy investigating.